Да, большое спасибо.
Так, замечательно. Тогда мы потихонечку, я думаю, будем начинать. Добрый день, дорогие друзья. Меня зовут Буклемишев Олег Витальевич. Я представляю экономический факультет Московского государственного университета. Меня сегодня попросили провести очередную сессию на апрельской конференции в Высшей школе экономики. Сессия А-14-4, которая называется «Производительность, рост и человеческий капитал». Мы сегодня будем говорить о вопросах, связанных с структурными изменениями в промышленности. У нас есть очень интересных 4 доклада, но сначала я должен предупредить всех участников, что мы осуществляем запись мероприятия и последующее размещением в интернет-пространстве, поэтому при наличии возражений у вашей записи просим отключить видео, остановить запись не представляется возможным. Спасибо за понимание, уважаемые коллеги. И чтобы не тратить время, наша сессия рассчитана ровно на 1,5 часа, будет примерно 15 минут на выступление каждому участнику, у нас 4 доклада, и после этого время на вопросы и обсуждения, которое тоже не будет зашкаливать за регламент. Я буду предупреждать коллег о том, что время выступления заканчивается. Я хочу с удовольствием предоставить слово нашему первому выступающему. Это Ксения Владимировна Бобылева, которая представляет Высшую школу экономики. И доклад ее называется «Contribution of intangible assets to the growth of the Russian manufacturing and service sector in a comparative perspective». Все, по-моему, так, Ксения. Пожалуйста, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So I will change switch on English if it will be okay, and would like to start. It's very important to start this session, so I try to do my best, try to do it in 15 minutes. So let's go. I'll show you my presentation. Today I'm pleased to present our first findings about contribution of intangible assets to the growth of the Russian manufacturing and service sectors in a comparative perspective. Our plan for today looks like this. So firstly, I would like to briefly remind you what is intangible assets, briefly show you methodology of calculation of these intangible assets. Also, I would like to explain why we choose just manufacturing and service sectors to evaluate, show you our key questions, what we already know and what we done new for these questions, our comparative results and takeaways. So let's start. I suppose it's very popular topic for talking about is intangible assets. In our work, we follow the main explanation of these assets. It's that assets that doesn't have any physical existence, like tangible assets, we cannot touch or feel them, but these assets have a current or future value. Talking about situation in Russia, I should talk on this second slide that according to expanded interpretation of intangible assets, the contribution of it amounted to 0.24 percentage points out of 2.92% average labor productivity growth during 2004-2014. So we should say that the contribution of intangible assets is in Russia not so significant. Anyway, we try to find why it's not so significant. What intangibles are the most plays the most important role in growth, and make some kind of comparative results. A few words about our methodology. When we're talking about intangible assets, we categorize them into 4 types. The first type is basic intangible assets. Here we evaluate investments, contribution of investments in computerized information, including software and database, mineral resource exploitation, entertainment, and artistic originals. The second great type of assets, it is R&D. Also, we try to calculate a contribution of new product development and new architectural and engineering designs. When we're talking about new product development, here we understand that this is new product development costs in the financial services industries that are not necessarily leading to a patent or copywriting. And the last category is very popular in market economy, so I suppose everyone understands what is market research and so on. Also, I would like to say that we use data from Russia claims, supply and use tables, and Rosstat official data, and some data that were collected from the disaggregated analysis of some specific sectoral research analytics. Well, talking about our model, we use the standard methodology for accounting for growth, which allows us to break the growth rate of production by the weighted average of the growth of various resources and changes in productivity. And we follow the presentation of growth accounting based on the value added of Jorgensen and Stira of their work of 2005. Measurement of capital input based on the perpetual inventory method, which with geometric depreciation profiles for each individual asset. Our main contribution here is the way of finding the net stocks of intangible assets. I can say that it's rather difficult question, and we use several ways and several variants of this category, and choose this that we find the most close to the real situation in the Russian economy. When I'm talking about industry group that we are calculate in our work, I mentioned that we will talking just about manufacturing and market services. In this slide, you can find all detailed industry names that were grouped here. And I don't want to stay on this slide. I suppose we will discuss it if someone will have a question about this. Most of all, I would like to explain why we choose evenly manufacturing and service sectors. First of all, if we look in this table, we can find that the second column shows us that investments, intangible investments during 2010-2016 are the highest in manufacturing and market services in real term, and as a percentage of GDP, that is in the third column. Also, we should say that value-added share of manufacturing and market services are significant too. In this statement you can find in the column 4. Also, we should say that manufacturing and service sector forms the essential part of the contribution to the growth. So market service formed 0.19 percentage points and manufacturing form 0.8 0.03 percentage points out of 24% of growth that formed by intangible assets. So that's why we focus just on these two sectors. And moreover, I want to say that it improved quality of cross-country comparisons that are available for many European countries and very popular of it. So our key questions is to calculate contribution, and I have already said that it's about 0.19 and 0.03 percentage points. Also, we try to understand the structure of the contribution of intangible assets in manufacturing and market services. So here we should find what type of intangible assets are most important in Russia and which one most important in another country. We look to the OECD countries and make comparison with them. Talking about literature review, here I should say that that interest in the impact of intangible assets on economic growth was preceded by studies on the impact of investments in ICT. So ICT is information communication technology, and it was very popular to divide capital on ICT, non-ICT, and try to calculate which one are the most significant in economy. So here is a lot of work that find this comparison. It's a whole Brynilson, Bazu, and also our colleague Ilya Voskoboynikov calculates contribution of ICT to growth to Russia economy too. But here I should say that the work of Karada, Halton, and Sikel of work in 2005 year for the first time directly measured intangible assets and not limited to the correlation with ICT. They proposed an extended classification of intangibles, not only R&D or ICT, and use the economic view of investments to formalize the arguments for capitalizing a wide range of intangible assets in companies and national accounts. And this work became very popular, and I should say that I follow this methodology too, and try to find information and to find data for measuring this expanded list of intangibles. And continue talking about my contribution. I should stress that we increased the number of evaluated intangible assets by type in Russia. Also, we explore the possibilities of official statistics for measuring this hard-to-measure assets. Also, as I had already said, we used different approaches to determining the initial stocks, capital nominal rate of return, and some other indicators that are in our model. And also, of course, we make possible cross-country comparisons with Russian economy. It's very important, and this, I suppose, our main contribution to this question. Going to results, I should say that it's interesting to know that that if we look at the contribution of intangible assets by types in industry leaders, so in market services and manufacturing, we can find that in market services it was formed mostly by industrial design, advertising, and market research. So this is this line that shows us it. And And in manufacturing, the most important is R&D, and mostly because of its growth rate. Here I should say that this conclusion corresponds to the situation in development countries. According to Karada, in development countries such as Finland, Germany, and Austria, research and development are important in manufacturing, and intangible assets not related to R&D are more important in service sector. But of course, if we compare the contribution of R&D in Russia, it's much lower than in development countries. And this indicates the untapped capacity in this sphere of competence in Russia. I want to go to the main takeaways of our work. We find some common of our intangible assets and in OECD countries. And this is that I already mentioned that R&D are important in manufacturing, and there are a lot of differences. For example, in Russia, contribution of intangibles to average value-added growth higher in market services than in manufacturing. In OECD countries, intangible assets participate more evenly in services and manufacturing. And the role of R&D in Russia is lower than in OECD countries. So this is our main findings. In conclusion, I want to repeat this and said that the main direction of our future research is improving this statistical base. We try to combine different indicators of that we use in calculating of intangible assets, and I hope we find more common between Russia and OECD countries, or find the way that we can improve the situation with intangible assets. Thank you so much. I suppose I have already finished.
Спасибо большое. Спасибо большое, Ксения. В первую очередь за соблюдение регламента невероятное просто по точности. И я хотел бы спросить, есть ли желающие выступить или задать вопрос.
Да, можно спросить?
Да, пожалуйста, пожалуйста. Пожалуйста, Иван Васильевич Десятников, да, прошу вас.
Ксения, очень интересный доклад. У меня такой вопрос возник. Вы не пытались посчитать эластичность, elasticity of output, вот intangible assets в России?
Конкретно этот показатель нет. Нет, честно говоря, не пыталась, но видела то, что есть работы немецкие, которые как раз второй частью своей это делают. То есть, в принципе, есть база, с которой можно пробовать это делать, но еще не пробовали. Спасибо.
Да, просто я подумал, что было бы интересно, наверное, посмотреть, посчитать marginal product of capital, учитывая intangible assets, которые вот вы нашли по России. Да? Ну, если включать это в традиционную модель роста, то было бы интересно, наверное, посмотреть.
Спасибо большое, я учту. Очень интересно, спасибо.
Спасибо. Спасибо. Есть еще желающие спросить или что-то прокомментировать? Так. Тогда мы благодарим Ксению за ее интересное выступление и двигаемся дальше по программе. Наш следующий выступающий – это Иван Васильевич Десятников, как раз, который только что задавал вопросы, и, насколько я понимаю, его соавтор присутствует с нами в зале, тоже будет смотреть. Иван Васильевич представляет Высшую школу экономики and Tran University of Tsukuba from Japan, as I understand. And the name of this report will be the technology level and the global value chain. Иван Васильевич, пожалуйста, the floor is yours.
Спасибо большое, Олег Витальевич. Спасибо, коллеги, за возможность представить эту работу. Thank you, everyone who is here for listening to this work. I'm switching to English. I hope Mrs. Tran is here and can also listen and maybe participate if needed. Okay, so this is a work called The Impact of Technology Level and Global Value Chain Formation. We joined with Tran from University of Tsukuba and me. So actually this is a long project. We started it a while ago, given the modern discussion on global value chains and economic growth. So recently there is a growing body of work trying to connect, to understand how GVC participation affects economic growth of countries that participate in it. But what we do, we try to look at how actually technology level of countries shape the global production structure. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today. So first of all, a brief introduction and explanation of what we do, what is our contribution. Then I will go through the model quickly, and I will show some findings at the end. So yeah, I will be very thankful to everyone who can provide comments how to improve our work. So first of all, well, this is already known for, I guess, most of audience, that global value chains play bigger and bigger role in the world, and there are several ongoing projects trying to measure global value chains, in particular the work on input-output databases. Yes, here we just list a couple of works that try to measure global value chain. So the recent, the last year report of World Development Report, they actually focus their attention fully to global value chain linkages, and here I bring this figure from their report, which is showing us how different is participation in global value chains. Yeah, is there someone who would like to ask something?
Yeah, I don't see your presentation.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. I'm going to share the slides. Thank you.
I was supposed to remind it, but I thought that you started later. In the
I'm
course
sorry.
of your
I just I'm moving on without showing you the slides. Now, can you see the slides now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for reminding me. Okay. So anyway. Here is a map where we can see that different countries, they do different activities. Like, for example, North America is focused on innovative activities, and let's say African countries are more in high commodities industries. And our conjecture is that the ability of countries to produce will shape the global value chain. So actually, how do people approach this problem? Well, they try to structure the global supply chain, and basically in the literature what we see up to now is several works, like working on spider type and snake type production structure. This is coming from Baldwin's work, this terminology. Well, the idea is that either we produce everything consequently, or we produce different parts in different places and then assemble it somewhere. What we would like to think about is a model that is agnostic about the production structure, so that we can apply it independently from what we assume about the production process. Yes, because in fact, what some studies find is that global production nowadays has features of both snake and spider. So we need some models that would be able to show this production in the world. Okay, so what do we do? First, we try to build a model that is agnostic about type of GVC. Second, we want to estimate the position and production volume in GVC using this model. And the key goal, the main goal, and we believe that this is our main contribution, is an attempt to find a simple model. Very simple model that would be able to replicate data in the world of input-output tables. Yes. So let me show you how do we do it. We take the standard Ricardian model, Dornbusch, Fischl, Samuelson, and we apply it to GVC. So basically, we want to have a multi-country model with one final good, and we want to introduce intermediate goods trade in this model. To see how the technology level would shape the formation of GVC. A setting, we live in the world of K countries. Each country has some technology level, TK, and labor endowment. And we assume a single factor of production here, which is labor, we paid with wages WK. Yes, here what is important is that 1 unit of each intermediate good contributes to the production of final good, which is single in this world. So in a sense, if you think like, for example, the production of a car. Yes, once we know that we produce a car, we know that we need 4 tires, 2 windshield wipers, 1 engine. Yes. So it's from the decision of final good, we immediately decide the intermediate goods production. And this is different from previous, from Dornbusch, Fischl, Samuelson, where preferences would decide the amount of production. Okay, the intermediate good is J, and it's continuous from 0 to 1. Yes, and in order to produce a part J, we set a technology threshold, phi J. Yes, so as soon as the country's level of technology is above this threshold, which we call complexity, then the country will be able to produce there. So to show you on a figure how we look at this world is, imagine here we have a car, right? So we can arrange our complexity of production from 0 to 1. Yes, for example, engine will be at the highest complexity, while windshield wipers lowest complexity, and then each country it should decide in which stage it will participate given the technology level that it has. Yes, so the traditional unit labor requirement here we defined as 1 divided by technology level of the country minus the complexity of this stage. Yes, this is pretty natural. As soon as technology of a country is higher, technology level of the country is higher, then we need less of labor to produce the goods. And once the complexity increases, we need more of labor. Okay, so given this structure, we have one proposition which is pretty straightforward, saying that the higher the country's technology level, the more complex parts the country will produce. Yes, given this, we can basically set some stage J star at which South country will produce the lower complexity parts, while North country will take care of more complex parts. Yes. Okay. Now we can try to solve this model numerically. So actually, what we do, yeah. So here we've got that at the stage J star, yes, where the countries are indifferent in between producing at stage K plus 1 or K, yes, we have equal marginal cost. We said that price of final good is numeraire, so budget constraint will be given as consumption in country K equals to wage in country K, and then we can go further to good market clearing condition, which is given in equation 2. So output is equal to sum of consumption for each agent in the country. Then we can we can look at labor market, yes, and labor market clearing condition would imply that we need to equalize labor supply and labor demand here for production of output Y. And this gives us these equations 3 for Y, which are different for country 1, yes, country 2 to country K minus 1, and to country K, which is the highest technology country. And well, we can solve this system of linear equations, so we arrive at a general equilibrium solution. And well, basically what we do, we use data, yes, on technology level, on labor endowment from the World Input-Output database to calibrate our GVC participation, which would be J star here. Okay, let me go briefly through our data and findings. I'm sorry, how much time do I have?
About 3 minutes.
About 3 minutes. Okay, so I will skip, well, the parts that I guess are pretty much known by most of the audience. Well, we work with WIO database, where we get the data on value added, on labor force, and on compensation of employees. Then we define our exogenous variables as labor productivity, very simple, is value added per labor. Technology level is going to be maximum of labor productivity among all industries in the country. Degree of complexity is a bit like complex index. So basically we choose the countries that produce the most of value added, like up to 60% worldwide, and we take for this industry, right? And we take the mean of labor productivity for this set of countries. And real wage for a country is the sum of wages divided by sum of labor. Okay, I will skip the definition of participation value as we data counterpart of our J star. Well, basically we said that J star is value added in foreign final demand. So so this is our data counterpart of participation value, meaning that what we look at, we have a final demand, yes, which is our final good in the world, and how much each country contributes to this final good production. And we use a WIO database to calculate this participation value. here are summary statistics. If needed, I can come back later to this. So basically, we do two exercises. First, two empirical exercises. One is a very simple verification of our proposition 1. So basically, we said that value added in world final demand of each country industry as a share of total value added in world final demand. This is our participation in the production, and proxy for country's productivity is 1 over A JK, which can be defined as technology level minus degree of complexity. Then a simple estimation with different fixed effects gives us a strong support to proposition 1, which says that the better is the stronger is technology level compared to complexity of the industry, the higher will be GVC participation. Well, this is straightforward. Yes, we are working with Ricardian model, and we know that Ricardian model is very good to reproduce global trade. So what we find is not very special, but it confirms our proposition 1. And a more interesting exercise that we do, so as I told you, we calibrate our model and we find our J-star participation value as well as wages from calibration, and then we look at the counterpart data and we calculate the correlation in between participation value, wages, calibrated and observed data. And as you see in this findings, that the correlation is pretty high and significant at 1% level. Okay, so in conclusion, well, basically our key takeaway is that we are looking for a simple model that is plausible inference of world input output linkages, and we show that indeed our model helps to to find such a counterpart in between empirical and calibration results. Okay, thank you very much. I hope I'm in time, and if there are any questions, I'm glad to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Спасибо, Иван. Сейчас переходим к сессии вопросов и ответов и комментариев. Пожалуйста, коллеги, если есть желание высказаться, if you want to say something or ask a question, please tell us about it.
Коллеги, я так понимаю, у кого-то был вопрос, я включила звук.
Пожалуйста.
Да, я слушаю.
Светлана, у вас есть вопросы? Просто не могу понять, звук включен или нет. Сейчас, одну секунду.
Вопросов у меня нет, я просто просила презентацию включить в самом начале.
Большое спасибо.
Спасибо. Спасибо. Если нет вопросов, давайте мы поблагодарим тогда Ивана и его соавтора, госпожу Лам. Thank you. Госпожу Транс, thank you, Ms. Tran, for joining us for this presentation, for your effort in preparing it. And сейчас мы переходим тогда к следующему выступающему. Я буду рад предоставить слово следующему представителю Высшей школы экономики Марику Добровскому с докладом «Transition to a Market Economy. A Retrospective Comparison of China with Countries of the Former Soviet Bloc». Марик, пожалуйста, ваши 15 минут, и
Спасибо.
мы готовы вас выслушать.
Spasiba, Oleg. I will speak in English because both paper and presentation are on this language. Basically, the purpose of my paper was a return to the debate of the 1990s and early 2000s on differences between Chinese and countries of the former Soviet bloc transition to market economy, which was very hot and sometimes emotional, and actually it was part of a broader controversy on the speed of transition. So Chinese experience was seen by its advocates such as Joe Stiglitz, Tom Rowski, Gerard Roland, as mentioned a few of them, as an example of successful gradualism versus supposed shock therapy, which failed in their perception in Russia and other countries. They claim that Chinese gradualists succeed in terms of higher growth rates, while Russia shock therapy caused a deep output decline. Opponents in this debate, I was one of those opponents, pointed to wrong perception and interpretation of facts. First, neither Russia represented real shock therapy. It was declared but not implemented, nor China slow gradualism. Then this was disregard for differences in starting condition and disregard for Central European and Baltic experience, which basically was absent, largely absent in this debate. There were three major differences in starting condition between China and countries of the former Soviet bloc, European former communist countries. First, this was level of economic development and industrialization. Second, differences related to social policies and social services. And third, to political environment. Regarding the first differences, at the starting point of market transition, countries of Central Eastern Europe and former Soviet Union had GDP per capita level many times higher than China in 1980 when it started its transition to market economy. And here is quite well seen in this table. Even in 1990, 12 years after the launch of Deng Xiaoping reform, still the level of GNI, in this case gross national income per capita according to the Atlas method, was 8, 10, sometimes 12 times lower in China than in countries of our region. Then both had non-effective, non-competitive state-owned industry. But in case of China, industry play much smaller role because China was under-industrialized, while former Soviet Union, Central Eastern Europe were over-industrialized with the high share of military industry. And another difference was labor surplus in China, especially in agricultural sector, rural areas, versus labor shortage at the final stage of central planned economy in our region. Also, but there were differences in terms of agriculture because both experienced some collectivization period, but agriculture in our region was much more industrialized, while China agriculture remained at its starting level of actually very labor intensive, not very capital intensive. So summing up, level of structural distortion in our region was much higher than in China. It was demonstrated among others in higher energy intensity, but not only. And here there are just few figures. the share of agriculture, forestry, and fishing in GDP was in China lower than in our region, except Ukraine, but also Ukraine was lower. Then the same concern structure of employment, China had absolutely the highest share, and even countries like Albania, some Soviet Republic, which had high share of employment in agriculture, this share was lower than in case of China. In services, the share of employment in China was very, very low as compared to all other countries. Here we see figures of military expenditure, and Soviet Union military expenditure, which were much higher than China, but also in case of countries like Bulgaria and Romania, for example, and also probably Czechoslovakia, but I don't have these figures, they were about twice higher as in China in terms of the share in GDP. Second group of differences concern social issues. In China, only public sector employees were covered by publicly financed pension system and other social policy instruments, not more than 20% of population. While countries of our region experience in the late stage of communist socialist excessive burden of social programs, which was a result of the political legitimization attempt of the late communist regimes. And the share of social programs in GDP actually was close to that in Western Europe, countries at much higher level of development. And also there was much higher level of social services such like health, education, etc. in our region comparing to China, where again only practically public sector employees were covered by publicly financed, by state finance services like this. And finally, there were differences on political front. In countries of our region, at least from the mid of 1980s, experienced spontaneous collapse of the political communist regime, gradual and spontaneous collapse of the centrally planned economy. So at the late stage of communist governments in our region were unable to use coercive power on massive scale, and that means that were unable to continue selectively elements of command system. While such opportunity existed in China. On the top of that was the huge demand for democratization in former Soviet Union and Central Eastern Europe. In China, there was also demand for democratization, but was brutally defeated in Tiananmen Square in 1989. So basically, China continued economic reforms after 1989 under the quite oppressive political regime. All these differences had serious consequences for transition strategies. Countries of our region had to deindustrialize in order to create room for market-oriented restructuring. While China had free resources, especially surplus labor in rural areas, to employ these resources in newly created private industrial sector. Here was a certain analogy with the period of NEP in the Soviet Union in the 1920s. There was also an easy way of privatizing agriculture in China, the main sector at that time, as I demonstrated, because this required just only dissolution of the People's Commune. While in our region, this was a problem of over-industrialization of agriculture and also some far-going social consequences, population consequences of collectivization period, especially in former Soviet Union. In countries of our region, there was necessity to reduce social spending in order to secure macroeconomic stability, which was hugely undermined in the late of 1980s, with few exceptions like Czechoslovakia, GDR, and partly Hungary. All other countries suffered from huge macroeconomic disequilibrium. China didn't have this problem. Also, building market economy under authoritarian regime was not the option in our region, as I explained, why it was the option for China. And also in our region, gradualism was less promising for a number of other reasons, like government inability to fine-tune changes. Also, there was disappointing experience with all kinds of market socialism reforms started in 1960s, even 1950s, individual countries, continuing in 1980s, but all of them gave rather dissatisfying results. So basically, this was another argument. Also, there was argument, political economy argument that fundamental change of political regime creates window of opportunity to, but short-lived to conduct radical changes. What were the results of transition? Looking back from today's perspective, we can say that with few exceptions, like Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Belarus, transition to market economy in former communist countries was completed in the early 2000, and the same also applies to China. The same applies to Vietnam, Laos, but this is not subject of Vietnam and Laos of my comparison. Later, after early 2000s, reform largely stagnated or were even partly reversed in individual countries, both political and economic. But in our region, countries which reform faster were more successful in terms of the lost GDP in 1990s and then pace of recovery in 2000 or late 1990s in Central Europe. And of course, in case of Central Eastern Europe, perspective of EU accession and then EU membership playing also additional helpful role. While when we look for China, there was various speed of reforms in various periods. The fastest reform were conducted under Deng Xiaoping, 1978-1984, and then the decade between 1994-2004. And there were also periods of slower reforms. Actually, after 2004, reforms slowed, and they even more slow under the current leader. Gradualism in China. First, for example, when we think about decollectivization in between 1978 and 1980, this was quite radical reform given the role of agriculture in Chinese economy. But then gradualism, of course, was the case, but not necessarily by choice, but as a result of political infight within the Chinese Communist Party. China recorded very high growth, actually the highest in the world, but it's gradually going down as in all other group of countries presented here. And basically we have some sort of reverse dependence in countries which represented lower level of development at the very beginning, like China. They enjoy higher rates of average growth than countries which were had higher level, like for example Czechia. When we look at contemporary picture, because this was also one of the purposes of my paper.
1 minute left. 1 minute left. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. There is far-going convergence actually between China and former Soviet Union, according to many indicators. Still, China has a higher saving rate, investment rates, lower social and health spending, and also suffers from the same demographic trends as Russia and other countries, Central Eastern Europe. Actually, only Central Asia has more favorable demographic trends. And here we see that in terms of GDP per capita, China is somewhere in the middle of the group of all transition countries. In fact, this is now upper middle income country. As I mentioned, has still much higher saving in investment rate. In terms of public expenditure of pension, China has still much lower levels than other countries. Still large parts of population are outside the public pension system. And finally, in terms of political characteristics, China is still politically oppressive country, autocratic country. But also we see that belongs to the group of countries which basically have a relatively more economic than political freedom, but also developments after early 2000 demonstrate that there are limits of I would say economic friendly authoritarianism, as many economists expected that this form of regime may be helpful for speeding up economic reforms. It didn't happen. Thank you. Спасибо.
Спасибо большое, коллеги. Так, спасибо большое, коллеги. У кого есть вопросы, замечания, комментарии, может быть, добавления к тому, что было сказано? May I ask you a question, Marek?
Okay.
It's very tempting to ask. Let's imagine that you are a policymaker and you are to start transformation in a country A. What would be your preference in terms of future rates of growth, future composition of institutions, and so on and so forth? What would you prefer to transform? Which country? What's the optimal starting point for a country to be transformed? What's your opinion?
Okay, Oleg. First, I was policymaker, and I actively participated in managing transition in case of Poland, and then I was engaged in policy advising a number of countries of former Soviet Union and Central Eastern Europe. So this is not purely hypothetical question in my case. Second, I think that the answer depends on the concrete starting transition conditions. I don't expect that in any country of our region, or China, for example, the condition which existed in 1980s or 1990s can repeat now. Now most countries have the different set of challenges, partly created by last 2 decades of slowdown of reform, but also, for example, by demographic trends, but also we have now a new serious challenges created by pandemic-related crisis. So one of them is, for example, rapid increase in public debt in many countries. Maybe Russia and few other oil-producing countries are affected to less degrees than, for example, most of advanced economies. I cannot think about Japan, but Western Europe, United States, United Kingdom, but also a number of emerging market economies like Brazil, for example. So they had already very high debt level before pandemic, and now, of course, this debt level explodes. It's very unclear, at least for me, how it can be managed, because now markets are a bit silent, and also they are fed by very ultra lax monetary policies of Federal Reserve, of European Central Bank, of Bank of Japan. But if this ends at some point, the situation may be very, very unpleasant for many governments. Then, of course, there are also, some social consequences of pandemic, and probably structural, because some changes which we observe, rapid increase of some sectors like IT related, for example, online commerce, are probably not only for good, for longer period of time, and while some other more traditional activities probably will diminish over time. So this will also create a number of challenges.
Okay, so in reality, you had no choice what to reform. But if there is a possibility to choose, is it easier to?
Usually, very few countries start reforms, serious reform, in good times. This is a very natural political process. Politicians, by choice, short-sighted. So basically, they start reforming, which is usually politically risky and unpleasant, because they do not have other choice. They are under the wall. So this is. But now is situation where then all countries face serious challenges, and most of them will have to do something to avoid even more unpleasant consequences of the current crisis.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions from our guests and participants? Хорошо, если вопросов больше нет, тогда мы благодарим Марека за его интересное выступление и переходим к нашему сегодняшнему завершающему выступающему. Это Антон Евгеньевич Толоконников, представляющий тоже Высшую школу экономики. И доклад называется, он у меня записан по-русски, «Промышленная политика и межотраслевые взаимодействия в российской экономике». Пожалуйста, ваши 15 минут.
Okay, you can see and hear me, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Anton. I will present your work, Industrial Policy and Intersectoral Relations in Russian Economy. So, overview of the work is following. Economy operates under market distortions. Thus, market equilibrium is not the efficient one. Therefore, there is a place for government to intervene and improve economic development. And government often adopt policies which favor some of the sectors more than the others. So the question is which sectors should be promoted. So the plan of presentation, first I will define market distortions, then I will give a general answer for the research question. I will present literature, the method, and results. So market distortions arise in the process of transaction between sectors, and they may be caused by markups and transaction costs. I assume that these distortions are exogenous and they cannot be changed. And these distortions lead to increase of prices of intermediate inputs and decreased demand. So for instance, on this graph, sector I sells intermediate inputs to sector J, and price of goods is 1 plus CGI multiplied by CI, where CI is cost of producing unit of output by sector I. So in the perfectly competitive economy, the price will be just CI. So effect of distortion is the following. So there are downstream sectors, they need input from middle stream sectors, but due to the fact that prices increased relative to undistorted economy, they demand less from middle stream sectors. And these middle stream sectors, so they become lower than the optimal size. And in their turn, they demand less from the upstream sector because there are distortions for price. So the conclusion is that effect of decreased demand accumulates through intersectoral network. And the most distorted, I mean small relative to efficient size, is the upstream sector. So which sector should be promoted? Government aiming to increase output and improve allocation of resources should disproportionately more subsidize sector suppliers of intermediate production. So I use methodology of work LIU 2019. And what is the idea behind this result? First, subsidies act like increase of productivity or supply shocks, and supply shocks distribute mainly downstream. So this is why we should promote upstream sectors. And the mechanism is the following. With subsidies, upstream sectors will make product cheaper and increase output. And this will give positive effect for downstream sectors. So such subsidies for upstream sectors will distribute over the whole economy. So related literature. First, there is a flow of literature which tells that governments produce industrial policies which generate resource misallocation and harm developing economies. So this literature tells that government shouldn't intervene in economy. On the other hand, for instance, LIU 2019 tells that governments of China in 2007 and Korea in 1970s supported upstream sectors, and this actually improved allocation of resources and increased output. There is also work of Fadinger with co-authors, 2015, and this work finds that negative correlation of taxes with input-output multipliers is optimal. Sectors with high input-output multipliers tend to be upstream, so they are suppliers for many other sectors. So conclusion of this work is somewhat similar to LIU, because Fadinger tells that upstream sectors should be taxed less. And finally, there is work of Miranda Pinto, 2018, and in this work finds that there are different optimal sets of intermediate input and labor corrective subsidies. So there are many ways to provide these subsidies to make first best allocation of resources. But this approach of Miranda Pinto is more dependent on specification of distortions. So methodologically, I skip derivation. Methodologically, we may find value of distortion centrality. This value shows how much final consumption in the whole economy will increase if we subsidize some sector I by 1 ruble. So the main thing in this formula is that distortion centrality, Xi, depends on parameters theta f and theta ig. These parameters represent structure of economy. And also distortion centrality depends on He ij, which is quantity measure of inefficiency. But due to hierarchical structure of economy, this distortion centrality in less proportion depends on our specification of distortions, He ij, and in bigger degree it depends on the structure of economy. And hierarchical structure of economy, you may see on the picture, it means that there are some sectors which are big suppliers for other sectors, and there are some downstream sectors which almost don't supply to other sectors. Okay, so distortion centrality shows how much final consumption will increase. But when there is a subsidy from government, subsidy is spent at the cost of government consumption. So government loses some final consumption. Overall, if distortion centrality is higher than 1, then subsidizing this sector will increase final consumption. And if distortion centrality is less than 1, then subsidizing this sector will decrease final consumption, and these sectors should not be subsidized. So this method has advantages. First, it allows to predict effect on the whole economy as it considers network structure. Also, it considers not only benefits, which is an increase of consumption, but also it considers cost, amount of subsidy. And finally, policy prescriptions are stable across different specifications of market distortions. So for different specifications, this method tells that upstream sectors should be subsidized. So novelty is that I present Russian network, and Russia is interesting as a big exporter of natural resources. And practical importance is the following. We present additional criteria for decision making on government support. But for sure, we don't consider many other reasons for subsidies which government also faces. Okay, here I present some results. The upper table is for Russia. I use 4 different specifications to calculate distortion centrality. Then I find a minimum value of distortion centrality and list sectors in accordance with this minimum value. And here are manufacturing sectors. So for Russia, this method tells that the most beneficial is to subsidize cement production, animal feed, pesticides, computer and information processing equipment, coke oven products. Then I compare results with results of НИУ for China in 2007, and Russia was at Russia I used data of 2016. So China 2007, actually there is some metal production, non-ferrous iron making, ferrous alloys, and some chemical productions. So it's first of all we see that sets of sectors are different, which means that actually there are different structures for economies. But on the other hand, we may tell that all these sectors are somewhat upstream, so they provide intermediate inputs for other sectors. Okay. Then I show you bottom sectors with low distortion centrality for Russia and for China. For Russia, these are sectors of food production, tobacco, and furniture. For China, there is also food production and also medicines. So these sectors, in accordance with the method, should not be subsidized, and these sectors are for sure downstream, so they are close to final consumer. So Liu in his work only considers manufacturing sectors, but this method can be applied also to other sectors. So I switch to, so I show you results for all Russian sectors. And here we see that new sectors are electricity, rent of machinery, some financial intermediation services, iron ores, some transportation sectors, and natural gas. So here I want to concentrate on natural gas because actually there is a story behind this sector. So just to remind you, when government subsidizes some sector, it in our model decreases its prices, and this helps to all downstream sectors. And actually, in the beginning of 2000s, Russian government controlled price of gas, and government made gas cheaper for domestic consumers. So we may argue that this control of price of gas is the example of Russia using logic of this model. And why these low gas prices were rejected? Mainly because Russia joined WTO and other countries complaining that low gas prices give Russian firms advantages. And that's why Russia should increase gas prices. But on the other hand, there was also some problem with low gas prices. For instance, export of gas was much more beneficial for Gazprom, and that's why Gazprom had a lot of incentives to keep domestic pipelines in poor quality and to tell that there is no gas for domestic consumers. And actually, this activity by Gazprom is somewhat negative supply shock. So overall, for natural gas sector, Russian government already did this policy, and now Russian government decided that we shouldn't decrease price for gas. That's why actually this methodology is not very good for gas prices. But on the other hand, some lessons are learned from this methodology. So this is what I wanted to say. Thank you for attention.
Спасибо большое. Опять же, абсолютно перфектное управление временем. Коллеги, есть ли у кого-то желание задать вопросы или как-то прокомментировать сказанное? Прошу вас.
Да, если можно.
Да, пожалуйста, Иван Васильевич. Да.
На русском, на английском как лучше?
Как? Ну, по-русски, наверное.
Да, спасибо, Антон, очень интересно. Я просто не очень знаком с работой НИУ. Скажите, пожалуйста, когда то есть я, насколько я понимаю, ваша работа является приложением работы НИУ для России, верно, да? Вы какое-то новшество в модели вводите, нет?
В модели нет, но вы хотите что-то узнать про модель?
Я хотел бы узнать, во-первых, мне интересно понять интуиция по работе на уровне отраслей. То есть есть ли в модели УЛЮ решение компаний вследствие субсидий?
Нет, только на уровне отраслей, и в этой модели нету specific production function, то есть это first order approximation. Но я пробовал для Cobb-Douglas production function, все, в общем, легко вывести. Для CES production function, скорее всего, не получится вывести. То есть это макроуровень на уровне секторов.
Я понял. То есть, когда мы смотрим на сектора, мы не предполагаем какую-то структуру рынка определенную?
есть предположение по поводу, ну, в общем, определенные предположения по поводу сектора есть, когда, ну, в общем, лучше, конечно, я вряд ли смогу объяснить все понятно. Но, в общем, там есть предположение о том, что когда один сектор покупает у другого, то этот сектор покупает полный рейндж товаров. То есть, если внутри сектора фирмы различаются, то покупающий сектор должен покупать полный рейндж товаров. То есть, немного таких, немного других. В смысле производительности.
Да, я понял. А цена каким образом решается?
Цена... ну, цена у каждой фирмы, у каждого сектора нулевая прибыль. Из этого выводится цена. То есть косты равняются цене.
Ага, интересно. То есть, и вы, такой вот другой вопрос, который просто возникает, используется ли input-output table в анализе?
Да, именно input-output table и был использован. То есть можно использовать данные WIAT, я их использовал. Можно использовать данные, которые Росстат выпустил за 2016 год, input-output table.
Ага.
Вот.
Понял, спасибо. И последний вопрос. Когда мы говорим про policy, да, она у нас рассматривается как exogenous или endogenous, вот решение?
Я не совсем понял. Ну,
Экзогенное или эндогенное?
Эндогенное, то есть,
эндогенное.
смотрите, решение то есть решение о политике, вот субсидий,
Да.
оно исходит из того, что какой-то сектор там развивается или важен, или это вне зависимости от развития сектора происходит решение о субсидиях?
Смотрите, в модели мы учитываем только структуру экономики, поэтому учитывается только место сектора в структуре.
Ну, то есть, скажем, грубо говоря, вот если взять пример России, да, то есть у нас натуральные ресурсы, это вот здесь у нас comparative advantage, давайте субсидировать, нет такого.
Нет, такого нету. Есть структура экономики, есть distortions, из-за distortions у нас возникает неэффективное распределение труда. Мы видим, что более distorted сектора upstream, поэтому мы направляем субсидии туда для того, чтобы улучшить reallocation и одновременно делать жизнь лучше секторам ниже в структуре.
Да, и последнее, наверное, просто как рекомендация. Просто у нас же есть национальные цели. Может быть, можно было посмотреть, сделать какие-то counterfactual анализис, как...
Да, вот я знаю, что национальный проект, но он же был отменен.
Ну вот, сделать counterfactual с помощью вашего анализа.
Да,
посмотреть,
counterfactual можно сделать.
Да.
Я делаю, да.
Ну, это просто интересно, я не знаю, насколько... Спасибо, да.
Спасибо.
Интересно.
Спасибо. Марик Добровский тоже хотел задать вопрос. Пожалуйста.
Да, спасибо. У меня, Антон, к вам следующий вопрос, касающий первой части вашего выступления, где вы упомянули там на примере Китая их поддержку для upstream industries. Это касалось там поддержки металлургии, которая потом привела там сверхмощность, проблема мировой торговли связана с этим, или каких-то других секторов?
Я смотрю работу, то есть я здесь про Китай, я ссылаюсь на работу НИУ, и он в своем анализе показывает, что вот эти upstream sectors, они с большей долей вероятности получали поддержку государства. То есть он проводит эконометрический анализ и показывает, что да, в соответствии с distortion centralities ресурсы были направлены именно в эти сектора.
Значит, если я хорошо понимаю, он судит по результатам, да?
Нет, у него есть, из этой модели можно вывести формулу, насколько увеличится выпуск при каких-то субсидиях. Я эту формулу не показал, и в общем, она есть, и в работе НИУ там есть вывод.
А в случае России, например, тот вопрос, который вы упомянули, заниженных цен на газ внутренних, там я не до конца понял, у вас есть какие-то расчеты, какие есть последствия для структурных перекосов в экономике?
В смысле, какое изменение выпуска будет? Таких результатов я пока не показываю. Но я могу сказать, что до 2004 года, когда Россия продавала газ на внутреннем рынке ниже, чем затраты на этот газ, то модель говорит, что субсидировать этот сектор не нужно. Но сейчас, когда у «Газпрома» есть какая-то наценка на косты, то есть он продает себе прибыль, модель уже начинает говорить, что давайте субсидировать газ, давайте уменьшать цену на газ. И в этом загвоздка, и нужно понять, почему модель так говорит и где она ошибается. Какие наши доводы в том, что так делать не нужно.
Я спрашиваю, потому что с точки зрения правил ВТО, в дальнейшем Россия продолжает находиться, скажем, под огнем разного типа претензий, что она субсидирует энергию, особенно газ, и что это создает неравные условия конкуренции.
Да, но сейчас в меньшей степени.
Да, конечно. Размер этой субсидии заметно меньше, чем это было 15 лет тому назад.
Меньше, да, я понимаю, что она меньше. Я этим вопросом занимался где-то приблизительно год тому назад, потому что спрашиваю, как с вашей точки зрения, вашей модели. У вас конкретных расчетов нет пока, да?
Да, пока нет, но, в общем, вывод такой, что когда есть наценка относительно костов, то поддерживать надо. Когда оценка отрицательная, то есть продаем на внутреннем рынке себе в убыток, тогда поддерживать не надо. Тут все ложится с отрицательной наценкой на логику, а с немного положительной наценкой уже, в общем, есть вопросы. Да, мне нужно разобраться с этим сектором.
Так. Спасибо. Ну что, мои уважаемые коллеги, спасибо вам, Антон Евгеньевич. Спасибо всем участникам сессии. Московское время 16:59. Мы завершаем ровно вовремя. Благодарю всех участников сессии за их интересные доклады, за вопросы, заинтересованные вопросы и участие в обсуждении. Большое всем спасибо. На этом наша сессия считается завершенной. Всем здоровья и хорошего продолжения конференции. Всего доброго.
Спасибо.
Спасибо.
Всего доброго. До свидания.